There we go. Now we're recording. This is session number 14 of Genesis in Depth, well beyond the intro level of a study through the book of Genesis. I'm Dr. John McMath. I'm joined here by my friends in the Philippines, in Italy, and in various parts of the USA. If you're joining by Facebook or YouTube, welcome and do all that stuff that everybody always tells you to do when you join a new channel. Uh, it doesn't change much of anything. I don't make any money for this, but I do have an awful lot of fun. So we're in chapter 12 of the book of Genesis, and we'll be moving on at a pretty good pace. I do want to spend a bit more time with the nuts and bolts of the Abrahamic Covenant because that's so important. But before we get on from there, I want to make a mention about what we're calling this section of the book from the end of chapter 11 through about the middle of chapter 25 is an entire section of its own introduced by the Toledot, these are the generations passage in 11:27. So Genesis 11 and verse 27, these are the generations of Terah. Okay, and this is one of those passages where it's pretty obvious what's going on. When the Bible says these are the generations of, or Ela Toledot, these are the generations Toledot. Yalad is the um, verb that means to give birth to or to begin something. And Toledot is here is what comes from the beginnings of Terah. So Terah starts things off, and then you have the entire family of Terah, which includes Abraham and nephew Lot. And those two will carry the story forward for several chapters. Abraham will go on through chapter 25, then we'll go on to Isaac and so on. And the Abraham story begins here. We're going to see the rest of the book of Genesis devoted to the the story of what happens with these offspring of Terah. So that's why Elitoledot, Terah. Okay, this is what happens with the family of Terah. So I'm going to share the screen, see if I can do that without blowing something up. Okay, let's see if that's working. Yes, look at that. I'm amazed. This is not a bad feature, actually, when you think of it. That's not too bad at all. Okay, so um, this is an outline of the Abrahamic Covenant, the territory, national, personal, and universal. The territorial blessing is specifically about the land. And as we see this develop in in this passage and the rest of Genesis, and then on into particularly Exodus and Deuteronomy, we'll see what is called the Palestinian Covenant. That name probably should not have been given to this Deuteronomic covenant. It got the name back in the days when British authors were writing a lot of commentaries, and they all called this the Palestinian Covenant because that's what the territory was called in those days. Today, that might confuse some people who think that Palestinians are the Arabs who who moved in and began throwing bombs at the Jews. But that's not true. Palestine is the name of the territory from Roman times. The Romans named this region that we call Israel Palestine in order to rub some salt in the wounds of the Jews. They didn't want to call it Judea or Judea and Samaria, which are the biblical names. They didn't want to call it Israel for sure, because that was the name of the nation under David and Solomon. So they named it after the Philistines. And the Philistines, of course, have nothing at all to do with the land today. The territorial blessing, this go from your country to a land which I will show you, makes this the promised land. And as we look at the covenants as they come up, we're going to see there's a description of it, more or less. It's not always the same, but it fits this land bridge between the edge of the Arabian Desert, which is about 25 or 30 kilometers to the east of the Jordan River, and the Mediterranean Sea. Between the desert and the sea in the east and west, and between the river of Egypt in the south, which is actually the Wadi El Arish. El Arish is a city about 10 kilometers south of the southern line of the Gaza Strip. And it's a seasonal waterway, mostly defined by the canyon that it's cut. It's not a very big canyon. It's not a very big river when it is a river. And it only runs water during the wet season for maybe a week. And then roads are washed out, everything. It's quite the place. But it's out in the middle of the desert. The river of Egypt should not be confused with the Nile. The Nile is way beyond Israel's historic boundaries. In the north, the limits of Israel in the north are variously given. Sometimes the promise is made of all the land up to the Euphrates River, which is all the way past Lebanon, all the way into actually the southeastern corner of Turkey and the northwestern corner of Syria. And the state of Israel during the time of David never possessed all of that land. They controlled it for a while under David and Solomon, but they never possessed it. So the territorial blessing is to a reasonably well-defined area on this piece of ground that we today call Israel, the permanent nation that lived there in the Old Testament, lived in roughly the same territory as the modern boundaries of the state of Israel. But that's just part of it. It's not just ownership of a piece of land. The really important development of this Palestinian covenant promise, this promised land, is that in the promised land, the people of Israel would be charged with living lives before God, with God as the king and the people of Israel as the subjects of the king. So the kingdom would have God as its king. There was no intention at the beginning for there to be any human king. And that would mean that every Israelite was free. he, he didn't pay taxes. He wasn't subject to the draft. He didn't have to. He didn't have to do anything uh, except obey God. So God's principles were set down in the law, and the people of Israel were to obey God and live with one another in accordance with the Torah, the principles of God's word. And on the basis of that living of a life before God would depend the blessing of God or the curse of God. So in the book of Deuteronomy, especially toward the end of the book, we see, I lay before you today the blessing and the curse. All these blessings will be yours. You'll live long in the land. Your children will be healthy. Your crops will be uh, productive. Your fields will be rich. All of the good things, the milk and honey will be yours. But if you are disobedient and walk away from these laws, then you will inherit the curse. And you'll get locusts and you'll get weeds and you'll get strife among yourselves. You'll be attacked by enemies from one side and another, and you'll run away from them. Uh, and I would argue that God's principles, as expressed in the Old Testament law and its development in the first five books of Moses, are in fact universally true. I think a deep-seated and profound respect for life, for example, embodied in the "Thou shalt not commit murder" commandment, that is fundamental to any human society. If people are running around murdering one another, you've got some real problems, and that has to be solved before God can bless the society. If that stays under control because people love God and they love one another, then everything is fine. If a sin problem rises to such an extent that something has to be done to control people, that's the basis of human government. Uh, it was probably Benjamin Franklin or Thomas Jefferson, one of the American founders, no doubt, said if all men were angels, no government would be necessary. Uh, yeah, and it isn't true. One of the basic takeaways from the Old Testament is that left to their own devices, people will eventually uh, develop habits of sin that will destroy their culture. And so government is established among men in order to ensure the blessings of liberty for themselves and for their posterity, the people who live after them. That is by itself the whole purpose for human government. And when human government becomes a tyranny, uh, free people, godly people, have the obligation to stop that government and to institute among themselves a more perfect form of government. That's what revolutions are about, and throughout history that has happened, and it's not always a good thing. because there is sin in the world. The territorial blessing has everything to do with the blessing of a people living in their land. And specifically, Israel is set apart as the um, special demonstration people. We're going to give you a land. We're going to give you a covenant. We're going to give you the blessing of a walk with God. And if you will walk with God and be a blessing to one another and to the nations around you, then all of these other blessings will come to you. That's the basis of the territorial blessing. And among other things, it means that the land of Israel is not arbitrary, it's not optional. The blessings of God are supposed to come to Israel in that land. And as we follow biblical prophecy through all the rest of the Bible, all the way to the end of the book of Revelation, we find that Jerusalem and the nation of Israel continues to be in the forefront. So in the Messianic kingdom, what we sometimes call the millennial kingdom, Jesus will rule on earth from Jerusalem. And all of the nations will come to Jerusalem to be taught by the law. Okay, and the law will go out from Zion. And that's a good thing. That's a very good thing of Jesus training the leaders for the rest of the world. A very good thing and a great blessing. So that's the land blessing or the territory blessing. And this is not conditional. God doesn't say, "I will give you this land as a blessing only as long as you're sinless and perfect," because God knew from the beginning that Israel would not be sinless and perfect. And of course they fell short because that's the nature of sin. As they lost their land for 70 years, and then they lost their land after the Romans from about 100 AD. They lost their land and stayed off of their land for the most part, except for a small group of very stubborn Jews who stayed there. They stayed away from their land in the dispersion until roughly World War II. Jews began coming back to Israel at the end of the 19th century and began buying up swamps and desert from the Egyptian or Turkish landlords. And on that worthless land, they built the modern state of Israel. Many would say that that's a fulfillment of prophecy. I think it probably is. But the more important part of that is that the blessing of God on this nation is only going to come when the people of Israel begin to walk with God in truth again. When they acknowledge their Messiah, then many, many things will change. So the blessings and the curses, all of the elements of God's relationship with his people are very closely tied to that land for the people of Israel. The church, on the other hand, does not have a particular promised land. We're told to blossom where we're planted. So if I'm living in the Philippines, that's where I'm going to be a blessing. If I'm living in Italy, that's where God has called me to be a blessing. If I'm in the mountains of Idaho, that's where I'm called to be a blessing. And that's the key thing. Okay, the second element of this Abrahamic covenant we call the national blessing. This is, I will make you a great nation. Okay, I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you as a great nation, and I will make your name great. That's a personal blessing. It's actually, there's a combination here. I will bless you and make your name great. Yeah, as a nation and as an individual, Abraham. And that personal blessing really comes down to every single Jewish person. They're all descendants of Abraham. So there is the potential for blessing. The national blessing has to do with the people group. Ethnos is a Greek word. We get our word ethnic from that, having to do with a specific nation. The nation is different from the territory it lives on. Yeah, so my nationality is roughly Scottish. Yeah, my father came from Scotland, north of England, and so I'm ethnically I'm a part of the Scottish nation, sort of. But my father came to America back at the beginning of the last century and became an American citizen. I was born as an American citizen, and so my nation is now um, uh, United States. I'm an American. Uh, what is the national blessing for everybody else? Yeah, there isn't a great deal of that, except to say that any nation, any people group who call on the name of the Lord will be blessed. If you want to inherit the national blessings of God, uh, it's not that hard. You choose as a broad group of people to follow God. Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord. Okay? That promise, I believe in Second Corinthians or Second Chronicles, is um, for everybody. But there's a national blessing for Israel, and developing that in the rest of the Old Testament, in particularly the covenant with David in Second Samuel. David was thinking about the construction of the temple. He had built a palace for himself. He says, "Here I am living in a house of cedar." The cedars had come from Lebanon. I'm having a great old time, and I'm well settled. But God is still being carried around in an acacia wood box. Okay, the Ark of the Covenant. And there he is in a tent outside the city. And David thought that was not a good thing, and we ought to build a temple for God. Now, God never asked for a temple. He actually didn't. He was perfectly happy in a tabernacle. The notion of a tabernacle is fairly simple. This is a visible place for the symbols of the presence of God to be kept. So the Ark of the Covenant had the copies of the Ten Commandments. It had Aaron's rod that had blossomed. It had a bowl of manna demonstrating the faithfulness of God. Uh, Pretty good stuff all by itself. The Ark of the Covenant was a reminder of the presence of God in the midst of Israel. David said, "I think I should build a temple." And his uh, his local prophet, character by the name of Nathan, who was a really good guy, thought that sounded like a wonderful idea. When Nathan went home that night, God came to him and said, "Go and tell your friend David, the king, that he's not the one who's going to build a temple for me. That David will not build a house for God but rather God will build a house for David. And that house is the dynasty of kings that would follow from David. The term house in this kind of a context always means the lineage of kings who will flow from David. So David would be the first, Solomon will be the second, and it will continue in that way. The next, not so good. Rehoboam is not a great king. He's actually rather an evil character, and he becomes the next king after Solomon. Uh, and the line of the kings of Judah continues down to the fall of Jerusalem in 586 BC. When the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem, they also ended the active operation of the kings of Israel. However, they did not stop the nation from existing or the line of David from reproducing. So the line of David continues, and we have genealogies that continue through the Babylonian captivity, through the return afterwards to Jerusalem, and both, well, the families of both Joseph and Mary come ultimately from David. And so the national blessing is a blessing about, in general, the Jewish people as an ethnic group, and specifically of the lineage of the Messiah through the Davidic line. That's how the Old Testament lines it up. And we see in this Davidic covenant that there's a promise that the Messiah will rule over Israel forever. His will be an everlasting kingdom. So this national blessing is also the kingdom blessing. The line of the kings will continue until the final king, Christ the King, that forms the end of Earth's history and begins eternity. The personal blessing is kind of interesting. I will bless you and make your name great, and so you shall be a blessing. It's kind of a cool thing. And I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. Okay, we'll just take that. Oh, there's a whole lot of blessing going on there. I'll bless you and make your name great. That's specifically for Abraham. So you, Abraham, because you're walking with me, and as you walk with me by faith, I will bless you. Now that means a lot of practical things. For example, sheep and goats and camels and whatever, uh, lots of servants and tents and all that stuff. Abraham would have the blessing of good pasture land, shade trees, the natural and material kinds of things that form a blessing. Beyond that, the personal blessing is a promise that we find developed in both Exodus and in Deuteronomy. As God's people walk with God in accordance with his covenant, they will experience the happiness of life. So this is not particularly land related. The land is the place where this blessing is going to happen, but the blessing is on a personal level. So your family will be healthy. You and your wife will get along and produce children, and your grandchildren will rise up and call you blessed, and you'll see multiple generations, and you'll see the fruit of your hands, and the fruit of the land that you've planted, and the work that you've done being passed from one generation to another. Uh, so it's a personal blessing of happiness in walking with God. Uh, okay. All right. Dum, 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 dum. Mhm. Now, this last part is so you shall be a blessing is really important. It's so important that there are some interpreters who have taken that line as not an indicative, you shall be a blessing, but rather uh, as an imperative. And so you be a blessing. Okay. Uh, the obligation of the believer here, of Abraham, is to be an active part of blessing the world around him. By your good nature, by your friendliness, by your helpfulness, by your willingness to cooperate with other people, you will be a blessing in the world because you are obeying the laws that are set out by Moses. You will be a blessing to the people around you. You don't murder people. You worship one God. You take time off. You honor your parents. You don't commit adultery. You don't steal. You don't lie. Uh, when these things are all put together, that makes the individual who is obeying God's principles a blessing. He's not he's not damaging anything. He's not hurting anybody. He's not stealing things. He is in fact a productive, happy, helpful member of society. That ultimately is what the Old Testament law is all about. You be a blessing. Okay, don't be a curse to people around you. Be a blessing. This is the great distinction when I think about what's happening in Israel today. Uh, Organizations like Hamas, Hezbollah, the Muslim Brotherhood, the mullahs in Iran, the ISIS crowd, the Syrians. There are 7 fronts in that war right now, different layers of uh, anger and hostility. What is the problem? Israel is, to a great extent, to a very large extent, trying to be a blessing to the people around them. So when the Arabs came into Israel in the years around 1900, in between the first 2 wars, between War I and II, uh, the Arabs came into that land because the Jews were building a nation and they were willing to hire their neighbors who were Arabs. The Arabs came into the place and they found work, better jobs than they could ever have had under the Turks before World War I or under Egypt. It just had never turned into anything under the other setups. But the Jews were building something that could be a blessing to everyone. And when that finally resulted in the declaration of a new nation in 1947, the Arabs responded by declaring war against Israel. Why? Because they have chosen to be Muslim. They have chosen to believe a lie. And as a result of that, they cannot inherit the blessing. Neither can they pass on a blessing. So the law says, you shall not commit murder. And Muhammad said, if there's a Jew behind that rock, O Muslim, go and kill him. You must kill him because he's not a believer. So they are quite opposite ways of thinking about right and wrong. The Jew says I have this objective standard and I should try to make my life live up to that. And for that reason, if Arab children are suffering, they can come to the Hadassah hospital and we'll take care of them at no cost. And the Arabs say, if there is a Jew living in happiness the other side of the border, it's my obligation to destroy what he has built, to kill his children, and to steal his land. Um, so there's one seems to have inherited a curse, and the other seems to have inherited at least portions of the blessing. I think the enemies surrounding Israel today are a part of the curse of God on the Jewish people who have not fully embraced their Messiah. And yet they have embraced the law. And that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. Uh, there's another line here that's important. The one who blesses you, I will bless. The one who curses you, I will curse. This is in verse 3. Blessings for those who bless, and curses for those who curse. This defines blessing in terms of the relationship of other nations to Israel. Now, obviously, at the very beginning, it was a definition of the relationship between Abraham and those who were not part of Abraham's family. But of course, that quickly grew much larger. And we see here that those on the outside who are helpful to Abraham's family, and ultimately to the Jewish people, receive a blessing in life. So the king of Tyre, for example, Hiram, the king of Tyre, was very helpful to David and later to Solomon in providing timber and generally providing a peaceful landscape in the area. And that kingdom was blessed as long as they were friends with Israel. The same is true with the enemies. Those who curse you will be cursed. And for all of history, much of the Ishmaelite world, the Arab-speaking world, has hated the Jewish people, made war on them. And this is a multi-generational, multi-millennial thing. It's been going on since biblical times. This is not something new that's over. The Jews coming back to Israel. This hatred goes on forever. Those who curse you, which is what the modern Arab states effectively have done, will be cursed. And what does a curse look like? When your enemy Israel chases you, 10 of them will chase 100 of you. And the Arabs can't seem to catch a break when it comes to wars with Israel. So the Iranians, who are not Arabs, by the way, they're Muslim but not Arab. The Iranians fired another 200 plus ballistic missiles at Israel, hit some air bases and some other military sites, killed some people. This is a really, really bad thing. But out of the 200, most of those missiles didn't didn't find their targets, Israel is going to strike back. And when they do, they're going to do significant damage. The curse on Israel is an attempt to kill them. The response from Israel and any other nations that want the blessing of God will be a destruction of those enemies. And that's what we're watching now. And those who stand with Israel will inherit the blessing. And that's a good thing. And then the last line is a universal blessing. In you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. That's really, really important. In you. Means in Abraham. Well, what's coming from Abraham? A family living on a land, following the laws of the king, and will end up leading to what? Christ the King, Christ the Messiah, the church age and the messianic kingdom. This is all going to flow from Abraham, and specifically Abraham in his life of faith and faithfulness will provide the foundational idea of the universal relationship to God through Christ the Messiah. So the universal blessing is there. The new covenant is the Old Testament pointer to the fulfillment of this universal blessing. There's a time coming when men will not say, hear the law, for they will all know me. Nobody will need to say, you need to know the Lord, because everyone will know God. There's a new covenant not written on stone, but written in your hearts. This new covenant is specifically with Israel when we see it in Jeremiah 31. But the blessing of that new covenant is so enormous that it spills over. The overflow of the blessings to Israel during the time of the end spills over to all the world, and everyone will enjoy the peace, the prosperity, the fertility, the happiness that comes from Messiah's rule. And we're building toward that now. It will be fulfilled at the end of time. So this is the universal blessing of redemption, of the kingdom, that date back to the promise of the seed of the woman through Eve, all the way through Abraham, all the way through David, all the way to Christ, and then looking forward to millennial kingdom and ultimately the eternal state. This is all about that. And we see all of these elements of the blessing to Abraham working out all the way through the Old Testament. So the covenant here lays down foundations, the footings, if you will, for God's covenant relationship with Israel. And in that, it lays out the fundamental elements of biblical prophecy. All of these things will find their conclusions in the end time. And we're going to watch these lines running all the way through the Old Testament. They start right here. Bless those who bless you, the one who curses you, I'll curse, and in you, Abraham and the Jewish people, all the families of the earth will be blessed. I find it fascinating that Israel is here specifically called to be a blessing to the whole world. Now they've rather emphatically rejected that in the practical sense. So Jewish people don't do evangelism. They don't do missions. They don't go to far-flung places and try to plant Judaism. That's one of the reasons that Judaism continues to be a relatively small group. The largest population of Jews today is probably still in the United States, in Florida and New York and a couple of other places. Pennsylvania has quite a large number. There are probably more in New York and Miami put together than there are living in Israel right now. But one day all of that will change. And this goes on into the rest of history. Now let's look more specifically. We see this next line, and I really like that. Back in verse 1, the Lord said to Abram, "Go." And so Abram went. Okay, that's that's very basic. Now, where did he go? So Abram went forth. This is verse 4, chapter 12. Just as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. Now, Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Okay, that's a specific historical note. Okay, the beginning of Abraham's or Abram's at this point uh, walk, his literal walk to Canaan, starts in Haran when he was 75 years old. There's an argument to be made that this call came to Abram when he was younger, when he was still living in Ur. And I don't have a dog in the fight. I don't really care whether the call came in Ur or in Haran. I don't think it makes much difference from a theological point of view. But there are some people that like to argue about that. So, whichever side of that you want to be on is just fine. It doesn't hurt anything. So Abram went. Okay. God said go. So Abram went. And this is always the essence of faith. Faith is always active. I, I'm going to have to emphasize that because that forms the definition of faith itself, and it forms our central understanding of what faith is and what it does. So faith itself is the attitude of trust. Okay, so I have an attitude in my head and in my heart that I trust God. Okay, and that definitely is faith. But that faith is built on the foundation of hope or assurance in the words and promises of God. Because faith is built on a foundation of hope in God's words, faith can grow. My attitude of trust can become stronger the more I study. The more I study God's word, the more I know to be true about God and his relationship with me, the stronger my faith becomes. And that, of course, is a good thing. But that faith, that strengthening faith, that growing faith, is from the beginning obedient. Okay, the obedience is always tied up with it. The obedience is not faith. Faith is the trust, and that the faith is not the knowledge. The knowledge is merely foundation for faith. But that faith will always result in active obedience to God. If we're not doing something about what we believe, we really don't have much faith. The book of James in the New Testament is all about this. James says, faith without works is dead. You show me your faith without your works. I will show you my faith by my works. And he's right. He's absolutely right. The one who says he has faith in God, but does not actively pursue the blessing of the world around him, is a liar. He has no faith in God. If he did, he would be doing something to take the good news next door, to bring a cup of cold water to someone thirsty, to help rebuild after a typhoon. Uh, this is the way life really is. So faith and hope and this loving obedience. Paul in the New Testament always says to the churches, I'm praising God for your faith and for the hope that you've shown and for your love to all of the brethren and the people in the areas of Macedonia, wherever they are. Uh, the faith, hope, and love is Paul's way of saying exactly what I've just told you. God said, go. There's the word. Abraham trusted God, and so he went. And what did he do when he got there? He began trying to be a blessing. And it didn't always work. Didn't always work, but he tried. Now, Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. So this gives us a time schedule. Uh, the journey uh, to Canaan would have taken several months. From Canaan, Abram and Sarai continued to Egypt. As you can see this all on the map. The Ur of the Chaldees is over in the Sumer area near the Arabian Gulf. They would have come up the Mesopotamian Valley to the northern end, the foothills of the mountains of Urartu or Ararat, and then made a left turn and come down the great international trunk route, the main highway, south along that land bridge through the promised land. They would not have walked directly across the desert. Nobody did that. They would have stayed in the Fertile Crescent. From Israel, the main road runs along the coast. It would go right down through Gaza, through El Arish, and into the Nile Delta. The Nile Delta at the north end of the Nile River is the place where the majority of the population of Egypt lived. And that's where the Pharaoh of Egypt would have lived, probably in the area around Memphis at the gateway to the Delta. So that's where we're going to see them next. Let's see, I can just get us into that. In verses 10 through 20, this is Abraham's failure in Egypt. And the pretty girl here in front of the pyramids is a young lady who went to me in a group, 25 years ago. So she's all middle-aged and grown up, probably has grandkids by now. But back then she was a pretty girl, and her name is Sarah. So I thought I would use a picture of Sarah in Egypt. The problem here, Abram took Sarah his wife and Lot his nephew and all their possessions and the persons and the sheep and goats that they'd acquired in Haran. They set out for the land of Canaan, came to the land of Canaan. Abram passed through the land as far as the site of Shechem to the oak of Moreh, and now the Canaanite was then in the land. The Canaanite, by the way, is the offspring of Ham, who had inherited the curse, and that turns out being important. And the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your descendants I will give this land." Very interesting. So God did not say, Abraham, here you are. This is your title deed to this entire land bridge. He says, to your descendants, I will give this land. And so he, Abram, built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. We're going to see Abram building altars in a variety of places as he moves along. The same is true of the rest of the patriarchs. The building of an altar is the preparation for sacrifice. We're going to take something and provide a sacrifice. Okay. So Abram passed through, he built an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. He proceeded from there to the mountain on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent. So there's a mountain to the east of Bethel. Whichever city we choose to be Bethel, we should be able to find a mountain east of that. And Ai should be just a little ways beyond it. With Bethel on the west and Ai on the east, and there he built an altar. So we've got an altar in Shechem, which is where the patriarchal highway comes down the crest, down the watershed crest. And between Ai and Bethel is still on that crest, north of Jerusalem, about 15 kilometers. And he built another altar there. And there he built an altar and called on the name of the Lord. And Abram journeyed on, continuing toward the Negev. Now there was a famine in the land. So Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. Now, why did he go to Egypt? Everything that we see in the rest of this chapter is Abram falling short of the ideal. God said, go to the land, and I'm going to bless you. I'll make your name great, and you will be a blessing, and I'll bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. Everybody in the world is going to be blessed through you because you've gone to the land. The land is the core of the blessing. When Abram leaves the land of blessing, he gets out from under the protection of God. So here he comes, and it came about when he came near to Egypt. He said to Sarai, his wife, see, now I know that you are a beautiful woman. And she also is 75 or 80 years old. She's getting to be quite the mature lady. And when the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife, and they will kill me and let you live. Please say that you're my sister, so that it may go well. Okay, very bad idea. Abram, the the man of faith, the man who defines faith in the Old Testament, really should have trusted God here. Uh, if he was going to go to Egypt, which was a failure of faith, he really should have trusted God to protect himself and his family and his possessions from the Egyptians. This was not this was not a faithful behavior. And actually, this is a fairly important point. Abram was not saved by the perfection of his holiness. Now, I want to say that again because this is such an important point. Abram was not saved by his perfect holiness. Neither are we. And that's a good thing. If I was depending on my perfect holiness to keep me saved, I would lose it every day. And I've made illustrations about that before. Notice the sister-wife motif here. We know from the artifacts of Mari and Nuzi and some other Genesis background that this was a thing. In some places, the wife is adopted as a sister. There's some very interesting language So the idea of marrying your sister or a non-relative becoming a sister in order to become your wife is a very prominent thing in Mesopotamian culture. I don't know that the Egyptians had anything like that, but we definitely see it in Mari and Nuzi tablets from this period. So Abraham may have been just doing the thing that he does. At any rate, it was a lack of faith. So the Egyptians noticed that she was beautiful. Pharaoh's officials saw her, praised her to Pharaoh. The woman was taken to Pharaoh's house. He treated Abram well for her sake, gave him sheep, and oxen, and donkeys, male and female servants, and donkeys and camels. And the Lord struck Pharaoh with a plague because of Sarai, Abram's wife. And Pharaoh called to Abram and said, "What is this that you've done? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she's my sister? So I took her for my wife. Now then, here's your wife. Take her and go." And Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they escorted him away with his wife and all that belonged to him. So Abram was saved from the consequences of his own sin by a pagan who was more honorable than Abram was. We'll come back next week. Okay, it's coming through here. No, it's not. Oh, I've got a real bad connection. Yours disconnected. Okay. All of these are still connected. I'm going to, folks, I'm going to, it's probably true, and I'm going to unmute. I have to keep on talking. Hello, everybody. I think I'm done. Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, I can hear you a little bit. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Jim.
Yeah, let's stay muted. Yeah, all I can hear is myself.
All I can hear is myself. Can anybody else hear me? Wave at me if you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay. We've got a bad connection here. But we will be back next week on Wednesday. Today's the 9th. It's the 15th. It's the 15th. No, 17th. No, 17th. No. 16th. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Anyway, next week we'll get next week we'll get back together again. We'll continue and we'll continue from chapter 13. Yeah, that's the story of Lot. Okay. For some reason I'm getting an echo. In my headset. I love you all. We'll see you next week.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Ciao.